So there's quite a lot of data available about the NOx emissions from diesel vehicles, but most information that I've seen hasn't identified which manufacturer has produced which vehicle. Then, say the IAQM data have got letters to identify the different vehicles. How did the US EPA know that it was VW that was causing the problems?
Well, from what I understand, the ICCT data, it was open actually. VW and the BMW cars tested were actually published.
I thought that they weren't identified as to which vehicle was which, although what the vehicles were was identified, but not actually each one and how they performed.
Okay, maybe not specifically, because there's this reluctance to publish information on individual specific vehicles, because it's not average. There might have been a fault with that individual vehicle, and people are very wary of that when you've got a small kind of sample size, which basically PEMS testing or lab testing inherently will be.
Yes, I know, and that's the advantage of the sort of data that you do. It might not be quite so accurate as PEMS testing, but you can test a huge number of vehicles in a very short period of time, and it gives you a lot of data with a lot of manufacturers. So have you actually looked at the data and determined whether there's any manufacturers that stand out?
Well, that's what I've shown at this conference, RTCA, today. Now, this is the next graph I'm going to show. To be honest, I'm a little bit nervous about showing this, but this is what the evidence and the numbers show. I've basically looked at the kind of NOx emission factor by manufacturer by year of registration. And broadly speaking, we've got this kind of mess in the middle that all manufacturers all but one seem to be having emissions at a similar level, which that kind of previous graph would show. But the most surprising finding is kind of how different one manufacturer is, which is Vauxhall. So these were kind of 9%, from a kind of significance point of view, these were 9% of the cars that we surveyed. And yeah, basically the contribution from the car fleet, because they're different, is about kind of 5% of the NOx from passenger cars as a kind of total. So that's quite surprising, and I think needs to be looked into. But also Vauxhall, there aren't any Vauxhall Euro 6 cars in the fleet either. So they're not producing the cleaner, latest technology cars. They're not on the road yet. And they're also, the reasons why is for others to work out, but they're emitting at kind of twice the level of from all of the manufacturers.
So what you've done is you've looked from, I think, Euro 2 to Euro 6. So how is the variation in the NOx emissions from those vehicles by Euro emission class?
Well, for diesel cars, we've only got a reasonable sample, Euro 3 to Euro 6. So Euro 3 to Euro 5 diesel cars are basically, it's flat, so they're emitting at the same level for NOx. And Euro 6, roughly speaking, the levels fall by half. Okay. So, but they're the only manufacturers, there's only some manufacturers releasing Euro 6 cars onto the road at the moment, even though the legislation was meant to be from September 2014.
That was for new types, not all new models.
Yes, yeah.
If you look at David Carshaw's data, he's got some data that goes before Euro 3. So if you actually look at his data, which I'm sure you have, it looks like a Euro 6 today of those that have been tested, very similar to pre-Euro 1, Euro 1, that sort of level, which is 20 years ago. So there's been not a huge improvement.
Yeah, so the data I've shown today is September 2015. So David Carshaw and I, have been doing these types of measurements since 2008, 2009. So in 2015, I'm not seeing very many Euro 1 pre-Euro cars on the road, basically. And they're falling out of the kind of the vehicle, the motor park. So Yeah, we're not seeing those anymore. But yeah, all the data before was also those really old cars, 20-year-old diesel cars, were still emitting at the same level as Euro 5.
Euro 5, you reckon? It's just I've seen some data from David which suggests that maybe it was closer to where the new Euro 6 are, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the sample size of those old cars was pretty small, actually.
Okay,
to be fair.
that's fine. Anything else you would like to sort of really highlight from your presentation today?
I think there are things we can do. I really liked Roger's idea, a diesel scrappage scheme. So could we have an incentive scheme where, because basically the problem is going to be diesel cars in the short run or medium run. So heavy duty Euro 6 works. So as those vehicles get into the fleet, and they will do quite quickly because the new vehicles are used really intensively, diesel cars are going to increasingly be the problem. So anything we can do around diesel cars is where we should be focusing our efforts. So tax changes, ideally, but also could a scrappage scheme, a sharing information and getting a kind of public campaign around this shift of things I think we could do.
I don't suppose your data will ever be able to provide a model by model Pacific NOx emission because you need so much data then.
Yes, so there's been a lot of phone calls asking for that information so they can visualise the difference between a Ford Focus and a Mazda and a BMW. But yeah, the sample size isn't big enough. If we did more measurements, actually you could do. But the funding hasn't been there to be out, 50, 100 days in the year. We struggle and fight to get the funding to get out for 20 days per year.
Well, that's a great shame because that would provide some real-world data that consumers could actually use in their when they're making their choice of vehicle.
Yeah,